The atmosphere crackles with a deafening roar, a fusion of the crowd's ecstasy and furious shouts. Thousands of voices chant in unison as the arena sand gradually turns crimson. Warriors fall under relentless blows, chains clang, and blades clash. At the epicenter of this bacchanalia stands an unyielding figure, Demetrius, known as the Lion of the North. For 3 years, no opponent has been able to break him. His name strikes terror into gladiators and instills hope in the hearts of the jubilant public. However, the narrative you are about to hear is not dedicated to his triumphs, but to his profound downfall. For Demetrius's greatest ordeal occurred not on the battlefield, but in a confrontation with a far more formidable adversary, the tormenting passion of the most influential man in the Roman Empire, Emperor Nero. This saga reveals how the most celebrated gladiator of his time became a hostage to the emperor's lust, demonstrating how all-consuming the corrupting force of power can be when it knows no bounds. Long before his name became a legend in the Colosseum, Demetrius was already a seasoned warrior. Born in the mountains of Thrace in 40 AD, he was the son of a tribal chieftain whose people had fiercely resisted Roman expansion for decades. From his earliest years, his existence was steeped in the spirit of war and strict discipline. He mastered the art of swordsmanship almost simultaneously with his first steps, and his body achieved an unbreakable strength amidst the harsh conditions of incessant battles. Demetrius, hailing from the rugged northern lands, was a warrior whose physique and power were awe-inspiring. His body, as if carved from stone, bore witness to countless hours of training and fierce battles. The rare combination of fair hair and sky-blue eyes for a Thracian earned him a nickname that echoed throughout Rome, the Lion of the North. However, as is well known, even the mightiest lions are not immune to betrayal. In the fateful year of 61 AD, during a bloody campaign against the Roman legions, one of his closest comrades, blinded by the gleam of gold, betrayed the camp's location to the enemy. The enemy ambush was merciless. Demetrius, like a raging beast, engaged in an uneven fight, sending more than a dozen Roman legionaries to their deaths before he, wounded, was entangled in nets and pierced by the spears of hunters ordered to bring him back alive. Under Roman law, leaders of rebellions were executed without delay. But on that day, fate decreed otherwise. Admiring his unyielding bravery, the soldiers who captured him decided not to take his life, but instead sold him to Lucius Aurelius Commodus, Rome's most famous and respected lanista, a man who saw not enemies, but potential sources of income in people. Commodus, with an unerring eye for talent, immediately recognized the makings of a champion in Demetrius. He spared no expense on his training, providing him with the empire's finest instructors. And Demetrius, combining the ferocity of his barbarian past with sophisticated Roman combat techniques, transformed into a living legend. For 3 years, his name was a symbol of spectacle, strength, and absolute dominance in the arena. But his meteoric rise did not go unnoticed. From the heights of imperial power, he was closely watched by one whose admiration would eventually turn into mortal danger, Emperor Nero himself. Initially, the relationship between Nero and Demetrius seemed like an innocent fascination. The emperor, known for his self-proclaimed artistry and passion for beauty, was captivated by the gladiator, charisma. He claimed to see in him the embodiment of a perfect balance of power, grace, and grandeur. Instead of watching gladiatorial contests from the imperial box, surrounded by senators and aristocrats, he preferred secluded balconies, where, hidden in the dim light, he intently followed Demetrius' every movement and gesture in the arena. Courtiers whispered that the emperor spent hours speaking rapturously about him, describing him as a living work of art. He commanded Rome's finest sculptors and painters to immortalize his image in marble and on canvas. Soon, depictions of Demetrius filled the palace corridors, chambers, and gardens. What began as simple aesthetic admiration gradually escalated into something sinister, a tormenting obsession. Nero ceased to see Demetrius as a warrior or even just a man. He began to perceive him as an object of possession, a precious asset existing solely to satisfy his whims. And when an emperor's covetousness meets unlimited power, the consequences are rarely favorable. What began as patronage of the arts soon transformed into the worst nightmare of Demetrius's life. All of Rome held its breath in anticipation of this momentous day. The 15th of July, 64 AD, marked a grand celebration in the Colosseum, dedicated to the 10th anniversary of Nero's ascension to the imperial throne. Amidst a series of lavish parades, captivating spectacles, and solemn sacrifices, a special event was planned. Designed to astound even the most seasoned spectators, the public trial of Demetrius, a man slandered and falsely accused of a heinous conspiracy against the emperor. This trial was nothing more than a cynical sham, meticulously orchestrated by Nero himself. The emperor, driven by a thirst for power and an insatiable need for spectacle, sought not justice, but to test the limits of human endurance and will to live. As punishment, Demetrius was condemned to a torturous execution in the arena, where he was to fight not one, but 5 ruthless gladiators simultaneously. The bloodthirsty and sensation-seeking crowd anticipated the fall of the invincible hero, but the outcome of this tragedy surpassed all expectations. Demetrius fought with the desperation of a man who had nothing left to lose in this world. Every movement, every swing of his sword stained the arena crimson as the fallen bodies of his enemies littered the sand, and the deafening roar of the crowd gradually subsided, replaced by an ominous silence. One by one, his opponents fell, vanquished by his fury and skill, until at last he stood alone, wounded, covered in sweat and blood, but still upright, his sword raised to the heavens as if challenging the gods to combat. And then something truly sinister and unpredictable occurred. Demetrius raised his gaze, and his eyes met Nero's. From the imperial box, the young emperor looked upon him with a strange mixture of rapture and madness, as if contemplating not a mere gladiator, but a divine creation crafted specifically for him. This fleeting glance, full of unspoken desires and dark premonitions, became Demetrius' true death sentence, foreshadowing even more terrible trials to come. On that fateful night, the triumphant Demetrius was summoned to the imperial palace. His heart was full of hope. He believed that the long-awaited freedom, earned with blood and sweat in the arena, would finally be his, or at least his valor would be acknowledged by Caesar himself. With the confidence of a victor, he made his way to the imperial chambers, anticipating a well-deserved reward. But instead of a laurel wreath, a carefully laid trap awaited him, nets and chains that would forever alter the course of his life. Nero's lavish private quarters, located on the Palatine Hill, epitomized wealth and refinement. Marble walls, exquisite tapestries, exotic fragrances, everything bespoke boundless power and opulence. However, that evening, all this magnificence seemed merely an artfully disguised trap. Demetrius was met not as a triumphant hero, but as a cornered animal. Instead of swords, the Praetorians held nets and chains at the ready. In an instant, the proud lion of the north found himself immobilized, captured like a wild beast. Stunned by the betrayal, Demetrius demanded the freedom he had earned by shedding blood in the Colosseum. In response, Nero merely offered a venomous sneer, declaring that he had never intended to grant him freedom. Demetrius' fate was different, not death, but transformation. The emperor had no need for a gladiator. He desired a living trophy, a symbol of his boundless power, which could be molded to his will. From that moment on, Demetrius's glory was consigned to oblivion, replaced by systematic humiliation. He no longer fought for the jubilant crowds in the Colosseum, but became a plaything in the hands of the emperor's inner circle. In private arenas created for Nero's sophisticated amusements, Demetrius was turned into an object of ridicule. He was forced to fight naked, to participate in absurd contests designed not to demonstrate strength, but to underscore his vulnerability. From a hero, he transformed into a participant in a grim theater, where his dignity daily became a spectacle, eliciting cynical laughter from a jaded audience. In this monstrous spectacle, played out before all of Rome, the most terrifying aspect was not the physical violence, but the profound, invisible spiritual trauma. Nero, that insidious emperor, sought not merely to destroy Demetrius's body. His true aim was to crush his rebellious spirit, to break the warrior whose name inspired dread. He yearned to transform him into a pathetic shadow of his former self, a living reminder of past glory and present powerlessness. The arena, once his kingdom where he shone in the glow of fame, became a grim prison, and the formidable lion of the north, whose roar made all of Rome tremble, now languished in chains, bound by the will of an emperor who found sophisticated amusement in his suffering. Nero appeared to be in complete control, having transformed Rome's most dangerous gladiator into an object of private spectacle, breaking his will. However, the emperor failed to realize that the mind of a true warrior cannot be shackled. In the solitude of his dungeon, Demetrius began to forge a new strength, one that did not depend on the steel of a blade or the roar of the arena. Each night, as he drifted into sleep, he closed his eyes and mentally transported himself to the mountains of Thrace, to the turbulent rivers where he honed his skills in youth, to the battles in which he fought shoulder to shoulder with his people. These memories became his impregnable fortress, his sanctuary, where he drew strength and hope. Within this chaos, Demetrius forged a stronghold of serenity for himself, a personal haven where he could shelter from the surrounding cruelty. He developed a system of silent rituals that became his personal mantra. Immediately before each humiliating bout, when forced to participate in vile spectacles, he would take a deep breath, filling his lungs with air, and tell himself that he was not the wretched slave Nero wished him to be, but the valiant warrior he had always been and would remain. Thus, even in these repulsive farces orchestrated by the mad emperor, He desperately clung to his true essence, safeguarding it from complete annihilation. And he was not alone in his endeavor. Other wounded gladiators and enslaved palace servants began to notice his unwavering spirit of resistance. They saw how Demetrius, though forced to obey orders, maintained a direct and steadfast gaze, never fully surrendering to fate. Gradually, his behavior became a beacon of hope, illuminating the path for other oppressed individuals. Thus, a network of quiet but persistent resistance was born. It involved no weapons or overt conspiracies, only subtle gestures, meaningful glances, and small shared rituals that united them. A barely perceptible nod in the arena, a deep breath in the dark corridors of the palace, memories of freedom whispered from ear to ear. Demetrius, unwittingly, transformed into a symbol of dignity and defiance, rising against oppression. What Nero intended to use to break his will and destroy him ultimately ignited a spark of invisible rebellion in the very heart of the palace, and this spark, like a seed falling on fertile ground, would eventually ignite into a flame that no emperor, however cruel and insane, could extinguish. While Demetrius silently fought for his life deep within the imperial palace, the Roman Empire was experiencing a period of profound crisis. Military legions stationed in distant provinces such as Hispania, Gaul, and Africa rebelled against central authority. The Senate, weary of the emperor's extravagance and despotism, began secret intrigues aimed at his overthrow. Rumors spread throughout the city that Nero had lost the trust of the Roman people and had become an uncontrollable tyrant. However, Nero appeared utterly indifferent to the political chaos surrounding him. He continued to indulge in his personal amusements, entirely engrossed in the idea of perfecting his masterpiece with Demetrius. The emperor even conceived a final scene for his cruel spectacle, a gladiatorial combat in which the Lion of the North was to fight all the mutilated gladiators of the palace. The sole survivor was to be publicly executed, which, in Nero's view, would be a grand culmination of his reign. But history had other plans. On the 9th of June, 68 AD, the Praetorian Guard, until then loyal to the emperor, revolted against him. The Senate declared Nero a public enemy, and troops marched on Rome with the aim of capturing him. Faced with an inescapable situation, Nero fled the palace. Unwilling to confront the humiliation he had so often inflicted on others, the emperor chose to take his own life. According to legend, his last words were, "What an artist dies with me." This phrase, more than anything, reflected his narcissism to the very end. With the death of the despotic Emperor Nero, the invisible shackles that bound Demetrius and many other unfortunate slaves began to crumble rapidly, like a house of cards. One by one, the prisoners found their long-awaited freedom. The empire came under the rule of a new sovereign, marking a cardinal change in the fate of the gladiator, whom Nero, in his madness, had tried to claim forever. However, Nero's demise could not instantly erase the deep scars left by his reign. Demetrius, like other freed prisoners, gained freedom, but along with it came the burden of invisible memories that tormented his soul. He remembered every humiliation, every moment when he was turned into a soulless object of entertainment for a bloodthirsty crowd. The new Emperor Galba, showing mercy, granted him a modest villa located on the very outskirts of Rome and ordered that he be cared for by experienced veterans, people who, like no other, understood what it meant to bear the heavy burden of war and past traumas. Far from the noisy arenas and bloody battles, Demetrius found relative peace. His tormented body was healed and restored as much as possible, but the deepest wounds, etched into his soul, proved beyond the reach of any physicians. The mind of the Lion of the North, as if seared by a hot iron, bore the traces of long years of oppression and suffering. Eyewitnesses recounted that he would silently gaze at the distant mountains for hours, as if trying to discern in their outlines his native Thrace, forever lost and remaining only in his memories. In 74 AD, at the age of 34, Demetrius of Thrace passed away. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes, yet those close to him asserted that he succumbed to invisible wounds inflicted by Nero. These wounds, like bleeding sores, gave no rest to his spirit. But Demetrius's life was not an unbroken tragedy. His silent resistance, his firm refusal to compromise his dignity, even in the most unbearable situations, transformed him into a symbol of something greater. He became living proof that the human spirit can endure, even when hope seems lost. The story of Demetrius and Nero's relationship is not merely a dark chapter in the history of the Roman Empire. It is a reflection of the struggle between two opposing forces, on one side boundless and ruthless power, on the other the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Nero, blinded by his might, imagined he could control everything: a warrior's body, reputation, and even soul. And while he succeeded in humiliating Demetrius, he could never steal what was most precious: his inner dignity, his moral inviolability. True freedom is not always found in broken chains or the ruins of prison walls. Sometimes it manifests in the ability to preserve oneself, one's identity, when the world around seeks to break and destroy you. Demetrius left this world young, his life marred by tragic events, but his legacy lives on. His fate is an eternal reminder that power can crush the body, but it is powerless against the essence of a person who refuses to surrender. And this lesson, relevant for all times, states, even in the darkest hours, there always remains an opportunity for silent yet persistent resistance.